Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for November 17th, 2022. Well, on Tuesday, the world came perilously close to World War III and including the possibility of a nuclear war. Missiles hit a silo in a village on the Polish-Ukraine border, killing 2 Polish citizens. The immediate cry, Russia did it. It's the Russians, we know it, no question. There were calls for activating Article 4 of NATO, which is a consultation under the argument that an attack on one is an attack on all, or even Article 5, which was a call to action in the case there's an attack on any NATO member. No need to investigate. We have to move quickly. The situation is obvious, according to so many people. Let's start with some of the background to this. The headlines, for example, the British tabloids, the British press, Tyrant's War on Ukraine, Russian bombs hit Poland. That's from the Daily Mirror. Metro, Putin's war escalates, Russian missiles hit Poland. From the Daily Telegraph, Russian missiles strike Poland. No investigation, no evidence, just the immediate cry for an escalated war. Bild Zeitung, the largest tabloid in Germany, the headline was, Putin fires rockets into Poland. Then you had the unhinged president of Ukraine, Zelensky, who had just addressed the G20 summit. Zelensky said, quote, today Russian missiles hit Poland, the territory of our friendly country. People died. It's only a matter of time before Russian terror goes further. We must act. He went on to say the Russian attack is one on our, quote, collective security, which is a reference to Article 5. And when he was asked, are you sure this was a Russian missile? He said, I have no doubt it was not our rocket. And he issued a call for increased weapons and funding for Ukraine. Then you had the Associated Press, which cited a senior U.S. intelligence official. How can they always find these guys? Who said, quote, Russian missiles crossed into NATO member Poland, unquote. Sky News, which is a British television station, Russian missiles have killed 2 in NATO member Poland. And the question they said, the only question is, was it deliberate? That is, the Russians deliberately attacked Poland, or was it the result of an accident due to a barrage of missile attacks against Ukraine? The former head of the British Army, Lord Richard Donat, said, quote, it's hard to explain it away as an accident, unquote. Now, as all of this was piling up, the hysteria that it's Russia, we have to be prepared for war. At the G20, Biden came out and said, it's unlikely it was fired from Russia, but we'll soon see. So a bit of sanity coming from President Biden. President Duda of Poland then followed that up by confirming it was not a Russian strike, it was a missile fired by Ukraine. Now, this led to a change in line for most people. Zelensky, of course, as I already quoted, said he knows that it was, I have no doubt it was not our rocket. Foreign Minister Kuleba of Ukraine said it's a conspiracy theory to say that it was a Ukrainian rocket. And here's his quote, Russia now promotes a conspiracy theory that it was allegedly a missile of Ukrainian air defense that fell on the Polish territory. No one should buy Russian propaganda or amplify its messages, unquote. No, NATO and Ukrainian propaganda is the only one that's acceptable. Now, then the line changed a little bit more, which is that it's still Russia's fault. You had Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, saying this is the result of Russia's illegal invasion. You have the United States NSC spokeswoman Adrienne Watson, who said, the party ultimately responsible is Russia. Then you have an absolutely unhinged war hawk named Anne Applebaum from the Atlantic Council, writing in the Atlantic publication, quote, "Russia deserves all the blame." And she says that what actually occurred, quote, "makes no difference," unquote. In other words, it's no difference if it's a lie to blame Russia. She said, "This is the result of Russia engaging in an advanced form of state terrorism," unquote. And she said, instead of negotiations, you need more military aid and more sanctions against Russia. Then you have the Lithuanian president. The Baltic countries continue to push for escalation up to and including World War III. The Lithuanian president said NATO must deploy more air defense on the Polish-Ukraine border with swift implementation. Now here's an interesting question as to whether or not this was an accidental missile attack from Ukraine. On November 7th, there was a report released by RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute of London. This is a leading military think tank for the British. And the topic of this report they issued is the Russian air war and Ukraine requirements for air defense. So timely, huh? It's a few days before this incident. And what they write, they conclude, is further Western support is needed to ensure that Kiev can counter Moscow's updated approach to the air war in Ukraine. And so as this situation unfolded on Tuesday, increasing calls for more, not just more weapons, but air defense, including the idea, reviving this idea of a no-fly zone. Now, meanwhile, President Biden announced that he's asked for another $37.7 billion for Ukraine. So on top of the $60 billion that the Congress has already pledged, he's asking for another 37.7. That's almost $100 billion. And no one knows exactly where it's going. No one knows how much more will be requested. No one really knows how much of that is for weapons and how much of that is for bribes and pocket money. And yet the flow of funds continues without much objection at all from the U.S. Congress. Now, there are two final points for consideration here. The first one is the obvious one. Will the nations of the transatlantic world learn the lesson of this? That is, how close we are by accident, miscalculation, how close we are to an expanded war which would include Russia versus NATO, Russia versus the US, which is already on the verge of happening, but one that could become a nuclear war. The need for diplomacy is absolutely essential. Not the non-negotiable demands that were made by Zelensky, who has obviously believed the Superman image that's created of him, that he can posture in front of any venue demanding more aid for the heroic struggle of the Ukrainian freedom fighters, even as they kick CNN out of the country because CNN showed a video of a Ukrainian soldier waving a Ukrainian flag in Kherson while giving a Nazi salute. That's the kind of censorship that includes shutting down opposition parties and opposition press and jailing dissidents in Ukraine. That's not exactly democracy and freedom. But no, instead of giving in to his demands for non-negotiable surrender by Russia, there needs to be a discussion of security guarantees for Russia, for Ukraine, and for all nations. We need to break with this unipolar order idea of the rules-based order being enforced by the US military and NATO on behalf of the British and Wall Street banks. Or you could say, if you haven't learned from this, is there intent to continue the war despite the danger of nuclear war? And I'm going to have a link at the bottom of the description page of a discussion with nuclear expert Stephen Starr under the heading, "What would a nuclear war actually look like?" So that's the first point. Will someone learn from this? The second point is what's the background to the urgency to keep the war going? And all you have to do is look at what happened at the G20 summit in Bali to see the reason. Russia is playing a leading role in building a new security and financial architecture, which is combined with the rebellion in the global south against a U.S. London dictated global order. That is the unipolar order. One economic model only is acceptable. That's breaking apart. The former colonial nations are saying we have had enough of colonial rule. We demand sovereignty. At precisely the moment that Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and the City of London are saying that no nation can have sovereignty, it must all come under the supranational government run by the central banks. So as we see this rebellion, we can see that the unipolar order is crumbling. And you can see it in the final communique from the G20 summit. Listen to this, quote, most members strongly condemned the war in Ukraine, most members. But then they say, quote, there were other views and different assessments of the situation and sanctions. In other words, not only was it not unanimous, but there was significant disagreement. And that's the reason the West, especially the leadership of London and Wall Street and Washington, is committed to destroy Russia to break up the potential for that opposition to succeed. That's what this war is about in Ukraine. And that's what people need to understand when you see the hysterical reactions and the danger that's implicit in this situation. Tomorrow's Friday. I'll take your questions on this or anything else you want to know. And watch this video from Stephen Starr. I think it will maybe give you sleepless nights and think through why we have to move quickly.